Welcome back, Quakes fans. For the first time in what feels like months, we finally have good news to talk about. Reported yesterday by Tom Bogert, it appears the San Jose Earthquakes have agreed a deal to bring in midfielder Eduard Löwen from St. Louis City SC. My name is Kevin, and you're watching the Quakesaholics. Let's talk about this pretty tremendous transfer news. First, what do we actually know about this deal? On screen now, this will be the actual caption that Tom Bogert posted, and in it, it reveals that St. Louis, in exchange for this player, will be receiving $425,000 in GAM, that's general allocation money, plus an additional $500,000 in add-ons, and that, at least for the remainder of this 2026 season, Löwen will be occupying a designated player title in terms of roster management. If you don't know what those terms mean, to keep it very simple, oversimplified in some sense, the Quakes will be giving about $1 million for this player, and he will be under a contract that doesn't have a restriction or a ceiling on how much he can make, other than the fact that it's just what the Quakes can afford. Every MLS team is allowed to have 3 total designated players, and in this case, Löwen will be our second designated player that is currently on the roster and actually playing for the team. We did get some additional information on kind of the context on why this deal was made, at least from the St. Louis side. It seems that Löwen did approach the club and he was asking for some kind of like a contract renegotiation or an extension to secure more years of actual, being with the club. St. Louis came back and said, hey, we don't really want to make that decision yet. We want to put that off. And then he came back to the club and said, you know what, I would like to look for other opportunities. And it seems like both the club and the player have good enough relationships that St. Louis actually did grant that, and that's why this move is happening. Back to the designated player portion, I do want to call out at the beginning of this video, he is currently making $1.3 million as a base, and the guaranteed compensation goes up to $1.45 million, just rounding there. I would assume that the Quakes are going to be matching this or giving him some kind of a contract in this ballpark. I don't think it'll be something like Timo Werner. For reference, Timo Werner is making $4.3 million. So just to kind of like set expectations, but we don't actually know the term of that deal yet. And the other thing to just, call out is that this is still technically a transfer rumor, but Tom Bogert has basically 100% hit rate when it comes to announcing these kind of things. So if he's saying it, we're basically interpreting it as this is done, and it's just, letting the ink dry on the contract, and the Quakes should be announcing this probably in the coming days. And yeah, in terms of just initial thoughts on this, the first word that comes to mind is just excitement. There's a much higher degree of certainty when I look at this deal that this is a player that is proven, this is a player that can succeed in MLS, and there's no reason to doubt that he can't, again, be successful here in San Jose. I think this differs from previous big name signings that we've made. For example, Timo Werner, there was some uncertainty because he went, I think it was like a whole year before coming to the Quakes where he only played like, I think 2 or 3 matches. So there was that uncertainty of like, what kind of Timo Werner are we getting? What is his fitness going to be like? Vulnerability to injury, which at this point we unfortunately now have those answers. And then even going back to the previous season, a player like, Chicho Arango, Joseph Martinez, although those were proven MLS players, I think this differs from that because, for example, Chicho, he came from Real Salt Lake with a pretty good goal record in that previous season before coming to the Quakes, but the majority of those goals were in the first half of the season. And the second half of that season, it was basically a goal drought along with some off-field, I'll say, drama, controversy, which we don't know the full details of. I think also Joseph Martinez, coming back, I think it was at that point only like 2 or 3 years removed from an ACL injury where he basically missed a whole year. So I don't think this is like those other players where they're kind of coming into this situation because they're trying to like re-spark their career or something like that. I don't think that's the case here. I think this is just Löwen trying to, secure a long-term deal, and San Jose was able to offer that when St. Louis wasn't. We did have actually the benefit in this deal that Quakes fans have seen Eduard Löwen twice. The first game, this was the away game at the beginning of the season, April 25th. He actually only played for the last 5 minutes of the match. So we can't really take away anything from that. He did miss that first part of the season, which we'll get to in a little bit. But this last game that we just played against St. Louis, he was here in San Jose, so we had the benefit of being able to see him, in person for a full 90 plus stoppage time, I suppose. And what's interesting is in that match, he was listed as a left wing if you look at the formations, but by no means was he playing the way that a typical left wing would be playing. Think like Timo Werner. It's not like that at all. It was a little bit misleading, honestly, if you look at the heat map, if you look at the positioning on the field for the majority of his touches and interactions with the rest of his team. This was a player that was very much more of like a box to box, even like a attacking midfielder. If you look at the heat map, of course, for touches, the touches are all over the place. This is someone who was taking set pieces as well. I do want to call out that one of the St. Louis goals was a header off of a corner, and it was Löwen that delivered that corner. If you look at the passing heat maps of like where he was and what kind of players he was linking up with, you can see in this graph that I'm having on screen now, he's the left attacking midfielder, LAM, and you can see that he is basically in the middle of the field. He's connecting with basically every player in the attack and even in the defense at some points. And you can see, for example, the player that is actually more naturally in that left wing position is actually the left wing back. Whereas on the right side, you see that RAM, that's the right attacking midfielder. That is actually the right winger in that more natural position. So don't get too caught up in like that left winger if you're watching like the highlights or just checking his positions on like FootMob or whatever. This is most definitely a box-to-box midfielder that can attack and defend. Again, going back to that match, just like from the eye test, right? This is a player that was involved in multiple plays that had results of like shots on target, passing, dribbling. It really, well, maybe not dribbling so much. I think the passing is what was more so showcased in that match. He also did have a shot that actually hit the post, if you do remember that. And so what I'm trying to say here is that this is a player that's very active in the attack. And the way that St. Louis actually originally described Löwen to the St. Louis fan base when they signed him was that he was a box-to-box player and that he would be an important piece to the spine of the squad. And I think that's exactly what we saw in that match against St. Louis. And honestly, I just don't think there's a better way to summarize that performance than if you go back and rewatch those highlights. Basically every dangerous play that St. Louis had, he was involved in. I've probably hyped him up a good bit just from that performance, but if we're going to be honest with ourselves, these days, basically any midfielder can look like Maradona when they play against this disjointed team in this second half of the season after the World Cup. So let's actually look at his numbers from this season and the season prior. In this season, if you look at just the minutes played, it is kind of on the lower side. It's only barely over 600 minutes. In that time, he had 3 goals, 2 assists. St. Louis has played 21 matches, and he started in 8 of those. So it just kind of points to someone that was maybe a little bit inactive. I just want to clear that up right now, that this inactivity was not due to injury. It was not due to performance. It was due to his late wife battling cancer. And so he didn't come back, until April 25th, which at that point is like, I think 2-3 months into the season. But since then, he's been playing phenomenally, as we saw when he played against the Quakes. So because there's just a smaller sample size from this 2026 season, I think it's also worth looking back at the 2025 season, which paints a much better picture than just the numbers he has so far in this season. We're looking at FootMob stats right now. If you look at shooting, passing, basically everything is a green bar. And the way that these bars work is that they're basically percentiles. So it's comparing, in this case, Löwen to midfielders that play similar roles in similar leagues. So if you look at this graph, it's basically saying that compared to other midfielders, in MLS, this is a player that is on the upper end in terms of performance. If you look at possession, pretty similar story. Most of it is green bars, which again is a very positive thing. There is some orange, but I'm not too worried about those. Like if I'm looking at all of these, successful dribbles percentage, duels won. I don't think that's as important for a player of this characteristic. Like I don't think this is going to be a new number 10. I don't think this is going to be a center attacking midfielder. Although he can play that way, if I had to compare this to someone else on the team, I'd say this is more of like a Bolaroo or Ronaldo Vieira, where it's just more box to box. And for that reason, if I'm looking at someone who can just have field coverage, have ball distribution, I'm not getting too hung up on whether they can beat their man dribbling. And yeah, I did name drop a couple of Quakes players, so just for reference, comparing this to other midfielders that have been performing better, I would say, for the Quakes, mainly Nico Shakiris and Bolaroo. Nico Shakiris having basically his best season for the Quakes. It's on the screen now. It isn't as green as someone like Eduard Löwen in 2025. So the stats are very, very positive in this case. They are very promising. And St. Louis is a team that has almost always given the Quakes trouble. Funny enough, the only time we've beaten St. Louis was the game where he came in the 85th minute. So I think that probably speaks to the magnitude of this kind of a player. Questions that come out of this, of course, the first one is this the right move for the Quakes? I hope I hope by now that you're convinced that yes, by all means, a transfer fee of even under $1 million and a salary of probably like 1 million ish, 1.3 million ish for this kind of performance and certainty of success within MLS, it's a no-brainer. Just to give comparisons again, the last significant midfield signing that we did was Hernan Lopez. That was a gamble somewhere in like the 6 to 7 million range for the transfer fee. I don't remember right now, but I think that's the salary was definitely higher than this. Hernan Lopez also was a designated player. I think it was in like 1.5 to 2 million range. Comparing to midfielders the Quakes have, comparing to midfielders that we used to have, comparing, the performance, the salary, all of this looks very promising. Of course, there is always some small element of risk of like, can this player reproduce that in a different team, in a different setting? I'm not as concerned. I mean, we've seen other players that come from other MLS teams be able to replicate their successes, mainly like Chicho, Joseph Martinez. So I really don't think that this is the same kind of risk of like, for example, Ronaldo Vieira, who is coming from a European second division, which probably many Quakes fans did not watch, right? Even like Luka Jovanovic, right? Coming from the A-League. Like, yes, that is a player that was the co-Golden Boot winner, but we still have to see how that actually translates to MLS. I don't think that's the case for Eduard Löwen. And then the next question is this the right timing? I mean, the knee-jerk reaction to a move like this is like, this just feels delayed, especially when Tom Bogert is saying that Eduard Löwen was having these conversations with St. Louis back in spring, so probably around the time that he actually did come back and played against the Quakes in that first match. It would have been much more ideal to, see this kind of a move being made as soon as the window was open, especially coming back from the World Cup, especially when Nico Shakiris was out and we were just kind of, slot in Nick Fernandez in that position as the center attacking midfielder. I think a player like Eduard Löwen probably would have been much more successful in that kind of a role. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, we can't dwell on the past. Right now, the Quakes are in a complete identity crisis. The midfield is lost. We are dealing with injuries. Ronaldo Vieira is out injured. He missed the match against the Galaxy, missed the match last night against Minnesota. And from what I can tell, there's no timeline on this. And I mean, we saw Timo Werner go down yesterday. We still don't have any information on that, at least at the time of this recording. So there's key players in the squad that are injured, and I think that this kind of a move, especially, even aside from just filling those positions on the field, like, this is a morale boost, right? Like, that second center defensive midfield position, covering for Vieira, like, we had Jonah Gonzalez, Ian Harkes, Nick Fernandez get starts across the last two matches. It isn't really clear who that next guy up is. And I think having another competitive player by no means is going to be a substitute player. Like, for sure, Eduard Löwen will be starting as soon as he gets to San Jose. And I think that maybe some of the players that were more accustomed to being starters for this team might have to get demoted to being that next guy up. And I think that's a good thing. Although, I think Nico Shakiris, his position is probably certain as that number 10. Bo LaRue, I'd imagine his starting position is certain, especially while that, other center defensive midfielder is out injured. In the long run, we'll have to see what happens. I don't think that this kind of a move, stumps the development of those younger players, particularly Nico and Bo. And yeah, I just think this is overall just a good morale boost to be getting high caliber players. I think this is a good signal to the fans in going for this kind of a big name in the league. And it's good to just take away the strong parts of other competitive teams. Like, this is another Western Conference rival. And I mean, if you look at some of the commentary from St. Louis fans, it doesn't seem like anyone is happy with this move. This is a player that is very well loved, very well respected, has always performed for St. Louis. And I mean, if they're all feeling negative about it, then why would we not feel positive about it, right? So yeah, all in all, I think this is a phenomenal move. Maybe a little bit delayed, but better late than never, right? We still don't have any timeline on like when that first match will be, what that salary range will be, but I think at this point, I don't think those things matter. I think the short term is what's most important to save this season, turn it back around. We need to get points, we need to get wins, and right now that's getting new players. Right now that's changing up the formation, maybe changing up the personnel. So overall, positive, very exciting. Thank you to the Quakes for finally making a move that the Quakes fans have been waiting for much too long now. That's all I had so far on this one. Very excited. I feel like I've said that like 5 times at this point. Very excited to see Löwen finally play for the Black and Blue. Hopefully, maybe even next weekend against Houston. That would be huge. But I'm not getting too far ahead of myself. Yeah, that's all I had. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. And let me know what you think of this move. Are the Quakes back? We'll see.